Okay, what are the keys to a good textile production? Now, we've talked about the boring parts. In our first part 1 and part 2, we're talking about history. So now let's have fun. So what are the keys to textile? Or what are the keys to a good textile production? If you look at the image there, you see that amazing, beautiful masterpiece of art. The combination of several cutting into the massive unit you're seeing there. Look at these images again. Another beautiful masterpiece of craft gotten from different yarns, different raffias. Has been coined and molded into this beautiful work of art. What the hands can do. Now we are in the part 3 of the textile design. What exactly makes a beautiful textile design? Those are the things we're going to talk about in the course of the study. Without any further wasting of our time, let's get started. So we are going to look at just 2 major objectives: the fabric design in Nigeria and the art terms in textile design. So some of those art terms and then fabric designs in Nigeria, those are the things we are going to look at in the course of the study. All right, so let's look at fabric design in Nigeria. Fabric design are one craft that have long played an important role in Nigerian social and economical life. Now, the traditional textile design and craft are still alive till today, despite the complex societal changes. Now, the cultural influence affecting all the people of the world has actually affected the textile design industry in Africa, not to just circulate to singleize Nigeria alone. So it's a global issue. All right, so now let's go deep. Let's go deep and see. Now, we have what we call the adire, or which is popularly known as tie and dye. And under tie and dye, we also have the batik. You understand? We have what? The batik. Now, in Nigeria, before now, we produce fabrics. We export those things. The picture you're seeing there are some of our exports. The whites, they gunch on this before they started bringing their own to us. But one thing or the other, the influence of the Western region and the Western influence, and then we abandoned our own thing. Let's still continue. Now, it is interesting to note that the ancient city of Kano in the north and Abeokuta in the south engaged so well in cotton cultivation, from which fabric are woven locally and dyed, like the picture you saw. By the 16th century, many parts of the country were growing cotton in abundance and had become famous for their excellent country clothes. Now, like I told you, in Nigeria, this was exactly what we were doing. In Abeokuta, in North, in Kano, they were engaged in cultivating cotton, and then from there we'll break it down to fiber, to yarn, and then get a clothes, and then we'll still dye the clothes and then export them. And it was a very resourceful business in Nigeria. Then what then happened? Now, this is the dye pit I was actually telling you before that you can actually see in Kano, in Abeokuta, where they make the adire. Even what he's wearing is adire. Now, the local dye indigo was widely used long before the introduction of the synthetic indigo dye, and the chemical was mordant, now containing caustic soda, hydrosulfite, from processing of the dye. But the caustic soda eventually caused synthetic indigo dye was not as fast as had been the indigo for local herbs. Now, no matter what you do, no matter how much you try, you see, something that is organic is organic. You can't replace organic with any artificial whatever. Now, before now, we have the indigo dye, and when you use it, the dye comes out on the clothes, and it comes out very sound. And then, it was watered down to synthetic. They introduced the use of caustic soda, hydrosulfate, and then that watered down indigo dye, the herbal method of dyeing clothes. But that's by the way. So we're just talking about the history, Nigerian dye, and then we'll just look at how it affects. So this, even a young boy that is producing his own fabric, for export. Now, Kano, Sokoto, Maiduguri, up until now are noted for plain indigo dye, fabric done by men in large communal vast of pit. while some business in Abeokuta and in the environment in the south are dominated by women using individual dye pots to create theirs. So in Kano, it is Kano, Sokoto, and Meduguri. They are the men that you see. But in Abeokuta, which is the west and the south rather, you see it is dominated by what? Women that uses the word individual dye pot. Now this is that of what? The Abeokuta. I guess I have another image for the men. Now, however, the procedure of spinning and weaving and dyeing is almost the same throughout Nigeria, with little modification by academic textile practitioners. So the Western culture still affected the way they made this. Those modifications were introduced by the academians. Then like us, we introduce some of those concepts, the Western concepts, to augment and then modify them. All right. So this is perfect example of what the academians brought into the local pattern. We brought in the batik, where we introduced the use of tingenting. Tingenting is an Indian or a Chinese kind of tool for applying wax on a fabric to create patterns on that fabric. All right. So now the traditional textile arts have survived till now as a result of our people's creativity. Just because of the way we are very creative, we choose to own it. We hand on it. We run it, and then it was working. It did not really die completely like other businesses. Now, needs and lifestyle that wove vitality into anything handcrafted. Tie and dye is one of them. Now, if you're talking about one of the crafts that Nigeria as a country owned, that refused to die, that even until now we still produce, some tie and dye fabric and tie and dye materials, it is tie and dye. That's the craft we owned and owned it very well. We would have gone far if we had actually, maintained what we are supposed to do. All right. So, now the traditional textile arts have survived till now as a result of our people's creativity, needs, and lifestyle that wove vitality into anything handcrafted. Tie and dye is one of them. Now, I explained what Tigentan is. Now you see how they molded the foam. It's a tool, to apply wax on a dyed fabric. So that was exactly what I was trying to explain before now, that we use, candle wax with Tigentan to apply the wax on the fabric, and then we'll apply the second dye to create several different types of pattern on the fabric. All right. So let's continue. Now the terms in textile design. Terms in textile design. The first term in textile design we'll look at is what? The loom. Or you call it the looms. Now what is a loom? A loom is a device used to weave clothes and tapestry. Now the basic purpose of any loom is to hold the warp thread under tension to facilitate the interweaving of the wefts. Now the warp, a loom is a device, is a machine, is a local machine that holds the warp. Now the warp is, the thread that runs on the loom. That's just the major work to tension it to make it straight. You understand? It tensions it under tension to facilitate the interweaving of the weft thread. Now the weft goes through the warp. You understand? Now this species shape of loom, now there are several shapes of the loom and its machine may vary, but the basic function is the same. So they might design the loom in different ways. It can be produced in several methods, in different, but the major function is the same. It doesn't change. It's just to hold the warp while you pass the weft through it. All right. So now let's continue. All right. So that is a local loom. You see the way the warp run through, and then the weft is what the other thread she allows to pass through the warp to interlace and then create exactly what she's looking for. So that's exactly what the loom is all about. Or that's what the loom is for. All right. So sewing. Sewing is the craft of fastening. Now we've talked about loom, which is a device. Now the next one we want to look at is the sewing. Sewing is the craft of fastening or attaching objects using stitches. made with what? A sewing needle and thread. Sewing is one of the oldest of textile. The art of bringing two different fabric and stitching them together is known as sewing. If your clothes tore, they tore apart. For you to bring them together, you need to use needle and thread to sew it. That's exactly what sewing is. And then we have different methods of sewing. We can hand sewing or machine sewing. We have different machines. We have industrial machines, and then we have the manual machines. And then we have our local kind of machine, the dwa, this dwa stuff. That's what they call it. So all that was the example of what? Sewing. These are the terms. And now the next one we look at is knitting. What is knitting? Knitting is a method for production of textile fabric by interlacing yarn loom with looms of what? The same or other yarns. It is used to create many types of what? Fabric. So you knit, bring yarn, you loom them, you knit them together, you create the different types of what? Fabric. Now the next one we'll look at is crochet. Crocheting is the process of creating textile by using a crochet hook to interlock loops of yarn, thread, or strands. So we use your crochet hook to interlock loops of yarn. Now all these are practical stuff. So in your school you can ask your teacher, "Sir, ma, can we do crocheting?" So there's time, if she has the skill, she can actually teach you to make those things. Those are some of the ways you can actually make some textile works for yourself. All right, so now let's look at the next one is tailoring. You'll be hearing of the word tailor. Who is a tailor? What is tailor? Now, a tailor is a person who makes or alter clothing, particularly a men's clothing. So mostly it is the men that they call what? The people that makes men clothes. They're the ones they call the tailors. So a tailor is a person who makes or alter clothing, particularly in men's clothing. So most especially if you're making a man clothes, you're a tailor. If you can alter material, convert them to shirts, suits, blazers, tie, anything that relates to man dressing is known as what? Tailoring. All right. Now let's look at batik. What exactly is batik? Batik is an Indonesia technique of wax resist dyeing applied to the whole cloth. Now the technique is originated from the island of Java in Indonesia. I've been talking about batik since the start of this class till now. So by now it should be ringing in your head. Now I've given you the full definition of batik. I said it's an Indonesian technique of wax resist dyeing applied to the whole cloth. This technique is originated from the island of Java in what? Indonesia. So if you use wax to apply on the whole cloth, I showed you that image before now. You saw the image before now, how the guy uses wax, to create patterns on the fabric. That is known as what? Batik. All right, with the use of tangent or tangent, depending on what you want to call it. Now the next thing we are going to look at is embroidering. Embroidering is a popular craft. It is a craft of decorating fabric or other materials using a needle to apply thread or yarn. Embroidering may also incorporate other materials such as pearl, beads, coral, and sequin, to mention but a few. In modern days, embroidering is usually seen on caps, hats, coats, over layers, and then blankets, dress sheets, danins, dresses, stockings, scarf, and golf shirts. So these are the places you can see golf. And then in Nigeria in particular, you see this your 1,500. You see those massive embroidering there. But that's the kind of the local embroidering we understand here. But embroidering is way vast than that. Some of the images I showed you in our previous classes contain some perfect examples of modern embroidering. So these are some of the places you can get embroidering and some of how you can actually see some of the embroidering. Now this is a perfect example of what is an embroidered cloth. You see how this pattern is. So they use needle to make these designs. All right. Okay. So I haven't talked about all this from that time till now. So let's do a quick summary of what we've learned so far. Remember, we've discussed a lot. We talked about the definition of a lot of things. So in the course of this study, we look at fabric designs in Nigeria. And then we talked about, that led us into talking about the tie and dye. We mentioned Abeokuta, Meduguri, Kanu, from the north, from the south, from the west, and from the south, we talked about Abeokuta. And I told you in the north, it is mainly the men that produces the adire. Why in the south is mainly was the women. In the north, that's where we have the dye pits, and then in the south we have dye pots. You understand? So these are just the minor differences are the things that we talked about. And then we also went further and then looked at terms and terminologies in textile design. In that terms and terminologies, I could remember we talked about batik, we talked about knitting, we talked about crocheting, and then what are the remaining ones we talked about? So just go back and find out, and then, you know, listen over and over again and have a taste of exactly what we discussed. Okay, and then it is time for me to test your brain. It's a Q&A, question and answering. Now, what is embroidery? Yes, that was the last thing we talked about. What is embroidery? And then I'm still asking you again. Question number 2. Define batik. If you cannot answer these 2 questions, I want you to pause this video right now, scroll back, watch it. In fact, scroll back again, watch part 1, watch part 2, watch part 3. So you'll be on full length with exactly what you've learned. All right, thank you so very much. So now let's go over to the word where we'll try our brain in the general question and answering based on your BESE, WAEC, NECO, JAMB, GC, to mention but a few. Okay. All right, now let's get started. A design done on fabric with wax and dye is known as dash. You should give me the answer to this question, and the answer is what? Did I hear you say painting? Tie and dye? Or did you say printing? I heard you said embroidery. You're wrong. The answer is batik. Batik is the answer. That is a design done on fabric with wax and dye. It's known as batik, I told you. And the instrument used in applying the wax on the fabric is known as what? It's known as what? What did you say? All right. Okay. Let's continue. All right, let's try another question. Okay, now let's look at this question. Question number 6. Now, stitching can be employed as a technique in dash. Stitching, do you know what stitching is? We talked about it now. To stitch, to bring 2 materials together, then stitch them tight, make it strong. Can be employed as a technique in dash. A, casting. B, glazing. Do you know what casting is? Yes. Glazing. Do you know what glazing is? Go and look for it. Know what glazing is. Throwing. Do you know what throwing is? Modeling. Come on now. Is it dyeing? Somebody is smiling. The answer is dyeing. Meanwhile, let me just explain what casting is. Now, casting is for the sculptures, or for the sculptors. You know, to recreate is an aspect, is a form of recreating already created objects. Glazing too is for ceramics. You know, after making your potterware, you fire your bisque firing, which is known as terracotta, and then you glaze, which is the final firing. After glazing, the work is ready for. So throwing wheel, throwing is the pattern of making a ceramic ware. Modeling too is for sculptors, you know, to mold something and build up something. The only thing now that requires stitching as a technique is what? Dyeing, because you need to suspend, to stitch, to block color from penetrating into all the other areas you want it. Okay, now let's try our hands in the next question. Okay. All right. Now, the following techniques can be adopted in tie and dye except A, hatching, B, plaiting, C, stitching, D, folding, E, knotting. This is the cheapest question you should do. So what's the answer? Yes, what you say? Did you say knotting? Come on now. All right, the answer is A, which is hatching. All right, thank you so very much for sitting with us through this class. I want you to go out there and explore. Learn to create your own fabric. Don't be limited. Don't wait for federal government to create works for you. Go and learn some of those skills and start making money. The market is too vast. It's too open. It's too wild. You can start a thing today and then make yourself useful even while as a student in school. That is why you're learning what you're learning now. Till we meet again. Bye-bye.